This is Autoline After Hours with John McElroy and Gary Vasilash, episode 563 for July 15th of 2021. GM Hydrotec gets ready for the hydrogen revolution. Watch Autoline After Hours live at Autoline.tv every Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. That's 12 p.m. Pacific. You can subscribe to this podcast for free by searching for Autoline in iTunes, Stitcher, or YouTube.
Autoline After Hours is brought to you by Bridgestone Tires, solutions for your journey, and by Borg Warner, propulsion solutions that support a clean, energy-efficient world.
Hey, Gary.
John, how are you?
I'm doing okay, fresh off vacation and back into the mad rat race again.
No show last week. That's right. I forgot about that.
Yeah.
And we had the opportunity earlier this week to do a little off-roading. That was all good fun.
Yeah, you and I both got to drive the new Ford Bronco, not the Bronco Sport, what I call the real Bronco.
That's
Hope
right.
I didn't insult anybody with the Sport, but I mean, that Bronco, wow, it go anywhere kind of vehicle. The GOAT,
Absolutely.
as they call it, go over any terrain.
So I was looking for what happened in history today. And so the first one, I figured it would be impossible for you to get. That in 1903, the first order from Model A came in. It was from a dentist in Chicago. But the second one sounds more like something you might get. Okay,
I
so
hope.
this sounds like might be right up your alley. This is 1909, and a car company that still exists was established. Now, if you remember what I just said to you, there's a clue in there.
A car company that still exists got established.
Little before that, what I said, just a little before that is the clue.
Uh-huh. I'm going to guess. No, I'm not going to guess. I don't know. What is it?
Audi.
Really?
So
Auto
it was
Union back then, right?
It was no. It was founded by August Horst, and his name in Latin is Audi, and that means to hear. So
listen.
It
right.
sounds like something you might get. Okay.
I'm not that bright, Gary. That went right over my head.
All right, let's just bring Lindsay in.
Lindsay, Brooke.
Hello.
How you doing?
I'm fine, John. Hi, Gary. How you doing?
Good.
What's new in your world, or is there anything new in your world?
Well, I agree with you, John, on the Bronco. I think it's just it's a slam dunk for Ford, and it'll be interesting to see how Jeep kind of reacts in some ways that I believe the Bronco is really superior to a Wrangler, and that the Wrangler being the Bronco's main competitor, really.
What do you think it's superior in?
Well, on-road manners.
Yep, totally agree.
Bronco kills it, just kills it.
Yeah.
But we all kind of knew that, and Wrangler really didn't have a competitor for a long time, so now it does. And just bump steer, Wrangler's got, Bronco doesn't have it. Just on-road manners just is really exceptional for that vehicle.
Oh, come on, Lindsay. Nobody drives those on road. Come on. Don't be a baby.
Hey,
right,
look, we got a special guest today. We're only going to have him for half a show. We got to bring him in. There he is, Charlie Freese, Executive Director of Hydrotec at General Motors. Charlie, great to see you.
Good to see you too, John.
So,
And,
Charlie, the last time we had you on the show was for the 1966 Electrovan. Now, you haven't been working on hydrogen that long, have you?
No. We had Floyd with us. I saw like when we were in that show, but unfortunately, Floyd's passed since then. But it was very interesting discussing how that technology evolved from such an early start in the 60s.
Charlie, you know what my favorite story that he had was when they built the whole fuel cell, they really didn't know how to turn it on. And it took him I'd have to go back and look at the show, but I think he said it took him like 3 days to figure it out, how to turn it on.
Yeah, it took a long time. Yeah, most customers aren't quite that patient.
So just so our viewers know too, you're not just a hydrogen fuel cell guy. I mean, you've designed all kinds of piston engines, right, in your career?
Yeah, actually, so my beginnings were all with diesel engines, and way back to Detroit Diesel, and worked on a lot of diesel engines. Actually, my first interview was on video was with you, John, on the, remember the Delta diesel engine that we did for Detroit Diesel, and that was actually to get into the lighter duty pickup trucks and things like that. So, yeah, it goes way back to that, and it wasn't until 2008 that I got into the fuel cell world.
In fact, just so our viewers who are watching, I know some of the podcasters may not know, but you got a couple of models of Corvettes in the background that Roger Penske actually raced. Not people who drove for him, he raced. And I heard you say he autographed them for you.
Yeah, those are some of my prized models. Yep, I always keep those in my office. Those are the two that he drove, and about my favorite body model or body style for the Corvette. Yep.
Totally agree.
Agreed.
So give us a thumbnail. What is GM Hydrotec?
So the Hydrotec brand is basically defining the technology and the product that we're now commercializing for the hydrogen fuel cell. And that's part of our 000 vision that GM has set, which is to go to zero crashes, zero emissions, and zero congestion. And what we've been doing lately is we've been on the process of taking that technology to production and putting it into some applications that become very interesting because they actually address all three of the zeros. Trying to move toward zero emissions is obvious with fuel cells because it just makes water. But when you start talking about zero congestion and zero crashes, we're getting into some really interesting commercial type applications like commercial trucks with Navistar, and we've recently announced Wabtec, which is to put it into locomotives, and also getting into aircraft applications with Liebherr. And what that does is that gets us the ability to take some of the freight and other things off the roads. So that's great for reducing congestion and moving toward the zero crash solutions. But it's also giving us the ability to get into the air, which gives you the third dimension there. And that's a great way to reduce congestion on the roads as well. So what we're doing is we're taking that technology into the places where it can make sense and provide sustainable solutions at the earliest possible introduction. That's what's so exciting about how we're trying to move into commercialization right now.
Go ahead, Lindsay.
I was just going to say, how about marine use, Charlie? I know that the German Navy used some fuel cells in some small coastal submarines, and I wanted to say this was maybe 20 years ago. I visited a company called Ballard, who you probably know, up in Vancouver, and they were ready to ship one of these marine fuel cells. And I thought it was really interesting, replacing diesel engines, which you're very familiar with, in a marine application, a submarine application. So it seems like there's many opportunities here for General Motors.
Yeah, so that's actually one of the things that we started doing when we were doing the very early work with the U.S. Navy was we put some of the Gen Zero fuel cell systems, which that's the one that was in the Equinox in 2007. We put a fleet of Equinoxes, 119 of them out into real world customer hands, and some of those actually are still running today. And the idea was we took that same technology and adapted it for unmanned underwater vehicles. And that gave them the ability to take out the batteries that would typically require a lot of complex, capture of the submarine and recharging times, all the things that go with that. And also you suffer some performance limitations when you put the battery into the cold environment. You might leave it there for months at a time without wanting to run the system. And with putting a fuel cell in, we overcame all of that. We were able to get a lot of power into the vessel, which could all be utilized, and it could go into kind of a wait and, kind of a stationary hold mode. So it didn't have to sit there and run continuously, and it didn't lose its charge because it had hydrogen on board. So that was a very interesting application that we're continuing to explore with the Navy.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Charlie, let me ask you. Okay, so you've talked about railroad trains. You've talked about aircraft. You're saying Class 8 trucks, big rigs. What about consumer vehicles? Does the fuel cell have a role to play there, or is that something that you're not paying a whole lot of attention to?
Yeah, so Gary, that's a great question. And I think the answer to your question is yes, to get to the breadth of the portfolio that GM and our products deal with, you've got to have both batteries and fuel cells. And one of the great things about the GM strategy is we've developed a strong depth in both areas. And you need that to put the technologies where they make sense. Sometimes a battery is the best solution. Sometimes a hybridized solution that has both battery and fuel cells is the right solution. So that's the approach that we've been building on. And the real trick to getting into these early adopter mode places where the fuel cell can start to come to market now is to deal with the old chicken or the egg problem of hydrogen infrastructure. And the way that we get through that is we don't tackle the chicken or the egg at all. We go around it instead and look for applications where you can put centralized refueling in place, and you can think of it as an ecosystem. And some of these consumers that have fleets of vehicles put in their own fueling anyway. So sizing the infrastructure for the hydrogen supply and the dispensing strategies can allow us to fix both the product side and the infrastructure side at the same time. And if you want to think about where fuel cells are getting a strong foothold today, it's places like factories and warehouses where they have forklifts, and it's already displacing battery-powered solutions. So they have hydrogen fueling that's happening right there. And what comes up to a factory or a warehouse, it's a commercial truck. So building on that infrastructure and then using the commercial truck and its other connection points as the logical locations for hydrogen fueling, that gives you that great starting point. And the other places that would intersect are places like rail yards. And so rail is another great example of that. And also shipping ports and airports. And so getting to those nodes where you have these different modes of transportation all intersecting, and they're large vehicles that consume a lot of fuel. They need fast turnaround times for recharging or refueling. That's kind of the logical starting point. And there's already, in some of those cases, a total cost of ownership incentive to put hydrogen fuel cells into those applications.
Hey,
so
that's
just
a great...
understand. Let me just get a clarification on that. So go back to the factory where they're using the forklifts that are hydrogen powered. Mm-hmm. So what you're saying is that because they have fueling on site there, that if a truck rolls in as it delivers its product, it could be hooked up to the same system and be refueled then.
That's one of the places you could refuel, exactly. And sometimes it's a centrally a fleet that will come back to a central location and then fan out to a number of locations, and that might be the logical fueling point. But these are predictable routes, so you know where the vehicles go. And this is a much stronger approach to try to get into the market rather than thinking about, let's say, a small consumer vehicle where nobody knows where we're going to refuel, and everybody wants it to be convenient at the local street corner. So that becomes a very difficult infrastructure play to make at the beginning when there aren't many vehicles on the road and you can't utilize these stations to the maximum extent possible. You might have stations that you need just for convenience, but they might right now fuel one vehicle a week. And that happens in California. That's a very expensive way to try to start to build out the infrastructure. Instead, I think, building on something like what we're talking about with commercial vehicles makes a lot more sense. And that's actually, if you think about it, back when the diesels were first coming into pickup trucks, everybody would come to me and say, nobody's ever going to want one of those things because, my gosh, you have to fuel up at a truck stop. And to everybody's surprise, actually, people liked those trucks because of what they offered. They would fuel up at the truck stop. They preferred to fuel up in other locations. And because so many of them came out on the road, eventually they started rolling out stations at your local street corner. So every Meijer that I drive by pretty much has a hydrogen or a diesel fueling pump at it. So, that's probably the kind of model that you'll see for the hydrogen infrastructure as well.
Charlie, go ahead, John.
Yeah, we've got a question here from one of our viewers, Dave Tuttle. He wants to know, do you have any estimate for the time frame of when a Class 8 hydrogen truck would have the same total cost of ownership as a diesel one?
Yeah, well, actually, when we're coming, and we haven't announced the exact rollout because it's dependent upon some customers that we're supporting, but when those vehicles come out into the marketplace, which is very soon, you'll already see that in certain applications, you'll get that total cost of ownership that's better than a diesel in some cases. Now, it's not going to be across the board. It depends upon what you're hauling, how far you're hauling it, what type of geography that you're in. All those things play a factor in it. But if you just look at it, if you're hauling heavy payloads, so hauling water and steel and petroleum or whatever you're moving that's heavy, that's the kind of payload where the hydrogen fuel cell technology will excel. If you're moving empty Amazon boxes and potato chips, you might be better off with a battery electric technology. But we're already seeing these applications where it can make sense, and that's going to be the starting point.
Go ahead,
Charlie, years ago, you and I had a discussion about energy density of fuels, which I thought was really interesting. And you were in diesels at the time. So we know that diesel is way off the chart compared to gasoline, much more per unit, much more energy dense. And gasoline is better than just about every, lead acid batteries, nickel metal hydride batteries, lithium batteries. Where does a unit of hydrogen stand on that scale, or the cubic foot, and how are you using that as really an advantage in developing these propulsion systems?
Yeah, so as you start to go toward electrification, you have basically two options. You've got the battery technology, which is right now moving in the direction of lithium-ion batteries, and then you have hydrogen fuel cells. And so those are your two choices. And today, liquid petroleum fuels still have a great advantage in terms of energy storage density. I mean, there's no question about that. But if you're going to move toward zero emissions, you're going to move toward the efficiency advantages that come from that, you're going to have to deal with either hydrogen or batteries. And one of the ways to get this high energy storage density on board the vehicles is to leverage the advantages that come with hydrogen. And if you want to think about it just on an equivalency basis, basically 1 kilogram of hydrogen has about the same amount of energy as a gallon of gasoline. But you have the added advantages that you're getting about twice the efficiency out of the propulsion system. So you need a lot less energy on board to get the same range. So it is something that we can manage. And if you start thinking about some of the applications that we've been talking about, like the class 7 and 8 trucks or locomotives, those are some places where packaging that amount of energy on board becomes very practical. We're already seeing very, very reasonable ways of doing it. And then once you've dealt with that, then you can get the advantages that come out of the zero emissions, efficient electrification.
And how about losses, Charlie, in the entire ecosystem of hydrogen from production to fueling the vehicle? We know battery electrics have a lot right now, and the industry really has to work on this. But how does the hydrogen system play out in that regard?
Well, it's an interesting question that you're asking there, because what you have to think about from the kind of a well-to-wheels type analysis applied to hydrogen. Today, a lot of the hydrogen's coming out of reformation of natural gas. And that's because hydrogen's actually quite available around the country. It just isn't at the place that you would want to necessarily fill up a truck. So the trick is, how are you going to deal with that overall supply chain, all the way from production through the end result of getting the vehicles filled up. And today, there just isn't a built-out pipeline system to move the hydrogen, so it's moved with trucks. And that's going to put a real constraint on kind of how far you want to move it, because that's expensive. And then you have to store it in the location that you're ultimately going to use it. And that has tank costs and other things like that. And then you have to chill it and compress it and put it on board the vehicle. So those are the pieces that play into this. But what's interesting is, if you start to build this out, once you get enough consumption of the hydrogen, and you look at some of the technologies that are evolving around electrolysis, then you can start to actually make your hydrogen close to the point that you're dispensing it, which takes that upfront part of making the hydrogen somewhere else and shipping it, and the expenses that go with that, or even the storage costs, get minimized. And you start to tune the system so that you're actually producing the hydrogen close to these big distribution locations where you're fueling big vehicles like locomotives or fleets of trucks and things like that. And that can open up all sorts of other applications, like trying to balance the renewables on the grid, where you don't have the production of wind or solar electricity on the grid matching the demand, and there's nowhere to put it. So instead you curtail those resources. Well, if you have these electrolyzers that can essentially operate in a way that they're taking that off the grid, you're basically capturing what would otherwise be wasted energy, and you're making a useful fuel out of it. So it's another way to kind of build this thing out. And if you think about it as an ecosystem, that can bring those costs down dramatically. So costs that are below $2 a kilogram of hydrogen are possible in the future. Right now we're sitting at about $5, and $5 is like $2.50 a gallon gasoline. So
wow. Yeah.
It's already into a kind of a practical range, and it can go much further than that in the future.
Wow, cool, great.
Yeah.
Charlie, fuel cells are not new. I mean, I'll bet I drove my first R&D car. I'll bet I drove it 20, 25 years ago. And in fact, more recently than that, I spent a whole day driving in a fuel cell powered Chevrolet Equinox in Los Angeles. And, they're still not quite there. What are the things that you're working on to be able to commercialize it? And I'm asking not just from the fuel cell standpoint, but the tank as well. Isn't that big part of the issue from a cost standpoint?
Well, all of that cost has come down dramatically, but the reason why we didn't take the Equinox to production, the one that you drove around Los Angeles, I mean, I think you'll recall that was a very nice vehicle to drive. I mean, I've had it in my garage. I've driven it around, from home to work. I've driven it in all different parts of the country where we've had that fleet deployed, and it's great. I mean, it works in cold temperatures, hot temperatures. It fuels quickly and easily. I mean, it was a great vehicle, but it was expensive. That was the problem. And so that's why that vehicle didn't go to production. We knew that we had to come down the cost curve, and a lot of things had to happen to bring it down that cost curve. We had to have some technological evolution of what we were doing, not just in the fuel cell, but as you said, in the hydrogen storage. But then we also had to go through and develop some other solutions and have some innovation that would help us get through that. And we've done a lot of that. So some examples are the precious metal that went into making that stack work for the Equinox. There was 80 grams of platinum in that system. So that's expensive. And we brought that down in the Gen 1 system that came after that. We came down to about 27 grams of platinum. Still too expensive. Wow. But that's a dramatic reduction. And this is for a system that would produce about the same amount of power, but the system also got a lot smaller. It got to about half the size, half the mass. So now you aren't just sitting with something that needs a big vehicle like an Equinox to haul it around, but you can get into actually a passenger car if you want to with something that's that small. And then we went one more step beyond that. And so that's the Gen 2 system. That's the one we're actually commercializing today with Honda. And that system actually gets us down below 20 grams of platinum. And we're testing systems in the lab that go down to 7. So, the cost trajectory is very aggressive. And then we had to also do work where we were not just looking at the product design, but in parallel, doing all the work on the processes to manufacture it. So it's part and process all at the same time. And that meant that we had to look outside of the automotive industry, because in automotive, we know how to scale, we know how to do things and get automotive quality, all the kinds of things that go around that. But what we really needed were things that were new approaches because of some of the technology that comes along with fuel cells. So we borrowed from industries like the filmmaking business, where Kodak developed a lot of capability around making films. And that applies right to the soft goods that we put into the middle of the fuel cell. Also, things like taking the bipolar plates that were composite graphite material. They were thick, expensive, brittle. And instead, we went to a stamped metal design. So you can think about making that something that we could stamp very thin. So now the whole size of the stack gets smaller. And that looks a lot more like a head gasket. So we know how to do head gaskets for a long time. So it's not quite that easy, but I mean, it's borrowing on those same common technologies. Or a big expense in a fuel cell is the thing that moves the air. So this is a compressor system. It happens to be motor driven, but it's a compressor system that looks a lot like a turbocharger. So, if you go back to my background, those things look nice and familiar to me. That's all off of a diesel engine. So we started bringing those technologies and then bringing them in with other technologies from filmmaking and actually paper making, roll-to-roll manufacturing type things. And in GM, we've been developing that part and process together, and that's brought us down that cost curve pretty aggressively.
Charlie, you talk about commercialization. When I think about your colleagues at Ultium, I think, okay, so there's Ultium batteries that people can get, and then there are the Ultium power modules of various sizes that can use the batteries and make the vehicle go. Does Hydrotec have something that's analogous to that? I mean, when we talk about fuel cells, I mean, we act as though everybody knows what they are. I mean, I mean, what are the things that you provide to a Navistar or a Wabtec or what have you? I mean, what are they?
Well, that's a great question, Gary. So what we've done is, if you think of under hood, a fuel cell like what we had in the Equinox was very, I'll call it disintegrated. You have a stack system, but you have parts around under hood that are all placed in locations, kind of like when you look under a hood of a conventional technology, like an engine, you see air cleaners and all the things that are distributed under hood, but that's hard to just kind of lift and drop into some of these other applications. So what we did was we developed what we call the Power Cube. So this is the Hydrotec fuel cell technology integrated into kind of a standardized, we'll call it a cube. It's actually kind of rectangular in shape, but there you go. You've got a picture of it. So what that does is that standardizes the interfaces, and it lets us, so we bring in air, we bring in hydrogen, and we bring in coolant after it goes through the radiator system. And then out from that, we have power, we have some waste exhaust, which is basically water vapor, and then hot coolant. And so this system standardizes the interfaces. And you can think about, if you want to go into something like, let's say a Navistar Class 8 truck, you could maybe put 2 or 3 of those systems onto a truck and have those standardized interfaces. And you don't have to deal with trying to break the pieces apart, package them all around the vehicle. Instead, you just have these modules. And in that case of the truck, we're actually locating them where the diesel tanks are located on the sides of the Class 8 truck today. If you want to think about a locomotive, now you might put 20 or 25 of those systems together, and then you can put a very high power system on rails. And it's, again, just reuse of that same basic module to get us through those transitions to the different markets.
And Charlie, beyond the stack, how about what kind of progress is being made on onboard storage? We used to have, composite spiral wound, cylindrical, very expensive, high pressure tanks. Has that needle moved at all?
Well, there's been cost reductions. The technology continues to evolve. We're still looking at compressed gaseous storage for most of these applications, at least on road applications. And it's because it actually is a pretty effective way of putting the hydrogen on board and dealing with it from a refueling standpoint. But there's been a lot of work in how we develop those tanks. The way you wrap the carbon fiber around it so you can minimize the use of the carbon fiber. Getting confidence in the systems in terms of how much of a safety margin you've got to build into kind of the design. If you have to over design it a lot, it gets a lot heavier. So optimization of the system so you can actually design it so it's perfectly sized and matched to what the system requirements are. And then standardization. So the industry starts to standardize. So now you can get some scale. And multiple companies might be using similar or the same tank systems, and so that's all a way that the cost can evolve down that cost curve. But when we talk about some of the applications like locomotives or maybe in aerospace, now you can start to think about putting liquid hydrogen on board, because one of the drawbacks when we talk about a car that you and I drive is nobody knows how long we're going to leave it parked. If we take it to the airport and we park it, it might sit there for 2 weeks and nobody wants to come back with a vehicle that they had fueled before it came to the airport and it's nearly empty because it boiled off all the hydrogen during that time frame. So instead, if we think about these applications where you've got a predictable route, like an airplane, it takes off, you want to have it take off near full, you want it to land near empty, that's a perfect application for liquid hydrogen. And so now you can start to bring the costs of storing a lot of energy on board down even further, and it's a more mass and volumetric efficient way of putting the hydrogen energy on board. Interesting.
Cool. Wow. Yeah.
You mentioned Honda. How are you guys divvying up the work on it? Do you say, hey, you guys take the compressor, we'll take the plates, or, how do you work that out?
Yeah, so the Honda collaboration began in 2013. That was actually where we started doing the advanced work, and we picked up on this Gen 2 kind of concept that I mentioned earlier. And then we took that through. We started the full co-development a couple of years later after that, where we were working toward the production system. And then in 2017, that's also when we announced the manufacturing joint venture. So it's been kind of a stepwise progression from the advanced work all the way into the product development. And what we did was we work as a complete team. I mean, it's integrated. There are Honda people in our facilities. There are GM people in Honda facilities, and all of our meetings are jointly managed. And what that allowed us to do is build on the best intellectual property from both companies. So Honda and GM at the time were number one and number two in the patent space. So we took all the best ideas. We used that as kind of the starting point, and then we could build out the team. And rather than having two teams that are using the same amount of resources for two completely different systems, we were able to combine them. So we could put more resources onto the same system, and we could share that work. So the teams, they meet every day. I mean, we manage the 13-hour difference in time. So that means a lot of very early morning or a lot of late in the evening meetings. But the teams have gotten pretty used to how to do that, and so it's completely integrated. So to your point, sometimes there's a Honda person that might be doing, let's say, a compressor or a bipolar plate or something like that, and there would be a GM person that might be working on a membrane or an electrode design or something of that nature. So that's how we kind of break it up, and it's all done as an integrated team.
Charlie, when will we see a number of hydrogen-powered vehicles on the road? I mean, we did a show some years ago with Toyota and their Project Portal. I mean, and so there's a few of those out there. Hyundai's talked about having their fuel cell truck. But again, these are very small. I mean, you might see them like unicorns. I mean, do you see within 5 years, 2 years, 3 years that we may actually just see them commonly?
Well, I think it's going to probably depend on where you live, right? Sometimes there's going to be infrastructure that's going to develop according to these applications that we talked about. So if you have a certain set of applications where they're very supportive of a total cost of ownership model, where it already makes sense to move toward hydrogen in these big vehicles, it'll have payback, because these commercial vehicles, those are tools, right? I mean, those are money makers for the people that own those fleets. And so if you can't turn a profit with it and do something more cost effectively, then it's not going to grow and find its way into large fleets as quickly. So the whole key here is to find those applications and then go into those first. And I think, we're definitely in the decade that you're going to start seeing these things come out. And I do have confidence that there's going to be certain market segments where it's going to start to take off. If you want to just see where the most hydrogen fueled vehicles are, it's actually in forklifts. I mean, it might not sound as interesting to people that are in some of the businesses that you're in, but that is actually, there are tens of thousands of forklifts with hydrogen fuel cells, and they just happen to operate kind of out of the way and inside buildings, but it's already showing that there's that reason for doing it. And I think what you'll see over time here is they're going to start kind of the trucks that pick up at those locations. That's going to start to evolve toward the hydrogen fuel cell. And I've got a lot of confidence that the locomotive applications that we're starting to develop right now with Wabtec have that same opportunity ahead of them. And it'll be a little longer before you see the aerospace applications, just because of the length of time for their development cycle. Automotive, we get used to 3, 4, 5 year windows where products kind of turn over, or something like that. But now you start talking about aerospace, and it's a 10-year cycle. The products are there pretty much unchanged for 40 years. So it's a very different model, but they'll start to come eventually too.
Charlie, how about the military? You guys showed us, it must have been 7 or 8 years ago now, out at Milford, a neat little kind of off-road, truck that was fuel cell powered, and a lot of advantages for the Army in this, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think it comes right down to solving the customer's unanswered needs, right? I mean, that's what this is all about. Whether it's we got a better cost model for putting the technology out there, or there's some unmet need. Like in the case of the military, they needed something that would be silent watch capable. So, stealth and stealth is a lot of things, right? It's sound, it's smoke, smell. I mean, it's all of these things. And so putting the hydrogen fuel cell into a truck that could export, let's say, more than 25 kilowatts of power, it could be flexible. So When we developed the Cirrus concept, that was allowing us to have a kind of a chassis that could be adaptable into everything from a truck to a cargo carrier. And eventually you could think about that as migrating toward autonomous technology. So that's where you can let the thing drive itself. And it could carry cargo. So that takes the soldier out of harm's way. So these are the kinds of things that you can start to evolve the technology toward. And it's not a one size fits all. Sometimes, the Army loves to use a single fuel, JP8, and they make their systems all compatible with that. And that's great for certain applications, but you can turn that JP8 into hydrogen. And you can start to use it to do things that you can't do with something that burns JP8. You can operate with stealth. You can operate in certain missions. That can be a great way to accomplish the goal. And you have this added advantage that if you're in an austere environment and you're using a hydrogen fuel cell, your waste product is water, which is very valuable to you in some of those applications. And you can make it en route, right? So. And that kind of ties in the same thing when you talk about aerospace. So in aerospace, what we're finding is the first step is to think about you take that turbine out of the tail of the airplane and you replace it with a hydrogen fuel cell. And that does a lot of nice things for you, not just efficiency, but think about when you've boarded an aircraft, especially if you ever had to do it from the tarmac, and everybody's putting bags on the plane and they've got heavy ear protection because you've got that turbine just singing away in the back. And
that's the APU.
The APU, that's the piercing sound that comes with it. Well, so just imagine if you pull that off board and you put in a quiet fuel cell that you can't even hear. There's a great process of improving the product and the customer experience. For me, with the way my travel seems to always change when we were in the days of traveling quite frequently, my travel would change and I get a last minute seat on an aircraft and I'd be the guy that have to sit in the back of the plane up against the, right by the APU, and you listen to it on the plane too, right? So we can actually improve that whole thing and put a fuel cell on board. We get the efficiency advantages that come out of it. It's zero emissions technology, but then you can start to think about other things, like what about using the water that you produce as a waste product? Now that can be used for either humidifying the passenger compartment, or it can be used for flushing toilets. And a big aircraft, a commercial aircraft for passengers, I think it takes off with about 2 tons of water to flush toilets. Wow. We can make the water in flight. Why not use the heat that we're rejecting as a source of heat for the passenger compartment instead of having electrical heaters that are using some of your onboard power capacity to go in and heat the passenger compartment? So this is the way that you can start to see the technology. If you just think about it in compartmentalized ways, you kind of lose the whole picture of what is possible to evolve aircraft or other vehicle applications towards something that can be even better than it is today.
It's exciting.
It is. And it's probably a good place to wrap up the segment, too. So, Charlie Freese, thanks so much for coming on the show. It's really exciting to see how much progress you guys are making and how you're looking at other markets other than just cars and SUVs to really bring fuel cells to the market.
Well, nice talking to you today. Thanks.
Thanks, Charlie.
Thanks, Charlie.
Hey, we're going to take a quick commercial break right now. Give a shout out to our good friends at Bridgestone and Borg Warner, and we'll be back right after this.
The world is changing at an ever-increasing pace. No matter what the mode of transportation, there is always the need for an efficient propulsion system. And that's exactly what Borg Warner has been doing since the earliest days of the automotive industry. We create innovative mobility technologies that reduce energy consumption and emissions while improving performance. Our proven track record has made us an industry leader in forward-looking propulsion solutions for combustion, hybrid, and electric vehicles.
All right, we're back. It's so interesting listening to Charlie talk about all this stuff because now I believe it's going to happen. All of us have known for years, oh yeah, fuel cells, they're the future of the industry, and they've always been the future of the industry. But wow, now it looks like it's right around the corner.
Yeah, well, when you look at, John, the kind of the disadvantages of battery electric for some of these applications he was talking about, you take the diesel out of the equation, what's left? Well, I think this could really fit the bill there.
Yeah,
I
like he
think
was talking about.
Could is the operative word, Lindsay. Could.
Well, yeah, and it's like he mentioned, it's the fueling infrastructure is a big one on this one.
Yeah, and that always has been. But as he pointed out, there is a lot of hydrogen out there. And we didn't get into the whole hydrogen story. I wanted to talk fuel cells with him, but clearly the answer is what they're calling green hydrogen. You don't want to necessarily reformulate this stuff from natural gas. You want to use some sort of green source, solar power, whatever, that is going to be zero emission. And that's what I think is really going to be driving this market is more and more countries talk about banning piston engine vehicles. Ultimately it is going to get to trucks and locomotives and aircraft and the like. And fuel cells sure seem like they fit the bill for that.
But boy, when you look at that package they've created, I mean, it's unbelievable. It's really the size of kind of like a small Ecotec 3 or 4 cylinder engine. Everything's in there.
So what strikes me, okay, so the three of us have been following this development of fuel cells for considerable number of years. And it was always the case where there would be some executive from the car company that would go up to the tailpipe and put a glass under it and get the water out and then say, you can drink this. Now, if we move beyond people saying, you can drink this, then I'll begin to believe that we're really going to get somewhere. And this is a real product, a real industrial product that people are going to be deploying to good use.
Well, I like what he's talking about, locomotives, heavy trucks, potentially aircraft, because I agree, for everyday use as a passenger vehicle, the infrastructure is just not there, and it's not going to be there for certainly in this country for a long time to come. But for routes where you go back to a yard every night, sure, you can do that.
Yeah, and again, the trucks have the space on the vehicle to package these large tanks. But a great thing that we didn't talk about much is it's the fueling is just about as quick as fueling a liquid fueled vehicle, which is a big advantage versus electrics right now.
Yeah.
John, you remember when you and I were fueling a Honda Clarity, I think it was. We were in California and we drove up to a station and basically it was just like pumping liquid gasoline.
Yeah. So let's move on. I know, Gary, you've prepared some questions here that you think we ought to get into.
Well, one of the things that I thought was interesting, and Charlie mentioned the popularity of diesels for light duty pickups, and I thought it was interesting that Ford announced that the F-150 after 3 years is pulling the diesel from its offerings. Now, I want to ask you guys: are they doing this in anticipation of the F-150 Lightning, or is this just simply a play of, you know what, we're selling so few of these things, let's just get rid of them?
Yeah, I don't know if the Lightning is really going to fill this bill. And I'll tell you, towing with an electric vehicle, man, your range just plummets. Put a payload in those trucks, versus what Ford is claiming in terms of range for this vehicle. That range is unloaded that they're portraying out there. And so, tow your Airstream up, through West Virginia or out west, and it's not going to replace diesel. Diesel keeps doing the job. If there's, a gallon left in the tank, it's still going to perform exactly like it did when the tank was full. And electrics aren't that way. And, we know how they perform. John, you and I have talked, Gary, the three of us have talked about wintertime performance as well. So I don't know. I mean, they're looking at the sales numbers, but I don't think F-150 Lightning is going to fill that gap anytime soon.
Yeah, I was caught by surprise by this announcement that Ford said it was going to drop the diesel in the F-150. But I mean, I don't know the breakout of sales. Ford does a good job of selling diesel engines, especially in its heavy duty pickups.
Right.
And they make a lot of money on them. I mean, they charge an arm and a leg for those things. I don't know the reasoning behind dropping it in the F-150, but I suspect, Gary, maybe you're right, that they're trying to limit customer choice to push more people into the electric one.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'll be an interesting thing to watch. One of the things that I think that we're seeing, and I think this is absolutely key to the industry moving ahead, is that we're going from an industry which basically had been focused on internal combustion to alternatives, and we're seeing fuel cells perhaps, and then certainly battery electric vehicles. Now, John, you alluded to the fact that there's going to be more and more countries eliminating, not minimizing, eliminating internal combustion engines. The European Commission came out this week and basically said by 2035, no more internal combustion engines. Now, of course, that has to be approved. There's, 27 countries involved. And but to even think such a thing would be possible. Do you guys think that the industry leadership is capable of wrapping their collective minds around this idea of, what the industry's been doing for 110 years ain't going to cut it anymore?
Well, one clarification, what Europe's talking about is banning the sale of new piston engines at that time. So if you've already bought one, it's not like, the piston police are going to come along and say, hey, you, give me that car. You can't have it anymore. But they're not going to allow you to buy a new one. But I think the industry is absolutely on board with the reality. It varies by company. But look at the amount of money that Volkswagen and General Motors and this week alone or last week alone, Stellantis, they're committing tens and tens and tens of billions of dollars of investment into this. I think they get it. I think they recognize the political reality that's out there, and they're preparing themselves. And I was so interested to see that Volvo is spinning off all its internal combustion engine business and transmissions, including all the engineers and the R&D people and everything, into a separate company, along with Geely, its parent. And they're going to continue to build, and that includes all the hybrid stuff too, by the way. They're going to continue to build piston engines. They're going to primarily use them in China, which has not announced a ban quite like the European Union has. And I got to believe that other automakers are going to be looking at doing the same thing. We're in the sunset years of the internal combustion engine, but it's still a massive part of the business. Certainly in the US, 97% of everything going out the showroom door today has got a piston engine in it. But how do you handle that transition as an automaker? How do you wind down those operations? And what do you do? And I'm thinking Volvo's probably, created the template that other automakers are going to follow.
Well, I think Gary brought up a good point is, the car park remaining, there has to be some sort of driver if political and environmental pressure really continues as these companies hit these goals of going all EV. You've still got this car park that's enormous in the world. And as we know, the older these vehicles get, the more they pollute. So there's got to be some sort of driver there. And it could well be, hydrocarbon fuels just get taxed like crazy, or use of the vehicle gets taxed in some way. You can't really dictate to people that can't afford a $40,000 EV what they're going to drive, but there's ways to kind of, push in that regard. And, a handle on fuel, a handle on registration. The three of us have joked about, performance cars, about having some sort of permit in the future to drive your, like Charlie Freese says, C2 Corvette at a racetrack somewhere. That's going to cost you money. And it'll probably cost you money to use these vehicles just in regular use after a while. So I wonder about that. The regulatory guys, and if you heard a couple of things interesting last week, Stellantis stock went down after that big EV day. And I was flabbergasted looking at that. They probably figured it would go up, but it went down. And the investment community is looking at what they're making money on right now is Hemi Chargers and Rams and Jeeps. So this is going to be an interesting transition. And we can't just look at it North America wise. We've got to look at it worldwide.
Yeah. Well, I thought it was interesting. So Herbert Diess, who runs Volkswagen, all of Volkswagen, so CEO of Volkswagen Group, said that by 2030, he sees the situation will be that it'll be, and I quote, the greatest transition the industry's gone through from horses to cars. Okay, by 2030, this is going to be that sort of transition. And he believes that they're going to be able to get parity with internal combustion engines with electric vehicles in the next 2 to 3 years. Now, there was another point that he made that I thought was absolutely fascinating. He basically said that everybody's starting from scratch, right? I mean, everybody is getting into this. So his goal is to participate over proportionately. Okay, so he's gonna try to get bigger gains, and so this raises a question to you guys. I mean, okay, one would argue, okay, Tesla's got this head start and they're way ahead of everyone else. But I mean, as you look at Volkswagen and Toyota and General Motors and Ford and Stellantis, I mean, are all of these guys resetting and having to compete like they had to compete 100 years ago?
I would argue, yeah. I mean, I think Diess is right. It's the quintessential paradigm shift. The technology has moved on and everybody starts from zero. To your point, Gary, Tesla's got a 10-year head start on everyone, maybe greater. And it goes beyond just its battery management system and stuff like that. It's over-the-air updates. It's its interface, with the giant screen. It's full self-driving, which isn't really full self-driving, but it's more advanced than any of the other ADAS systems out there. And so everybody's got to catch up. And as you guys know, there is a mad scramble to get software engineers right now. There's a global shortage of these software engineers in every industry, but it's particularly acute in the automotive industry. And we've seen suppliers and automakers both make acquisitions, not so much because they felt they needed to own that company, but it was a way of buying literally several thousand engineers. And so, yeah, I think it's true. They're all starting from zero.
Yeah, but we also have this transition period where you got to make money in it too. And, the companies making money in it are still the ones that are selling GTI Golfs and, Silverados as well. So, it's just an interesting period. There's so many similarities to kind of 120 years ago at the kind of dawn of the combustion engine industry, when there was steam and there was electrics competing, and fuel infrastructure wasn't really spread out yet, and a lot of new startup companies. I mean, the startups, suppliers, and automakers were in the dozens back in that time, and we're going to see a lot of fallout in the next few years in technology, component supply, system supply, and I think automakers too. I mean, look at all these electric pickup truck makers. Do you guys think that all of these guys are going to be around in 5 years?
Some will survive.
Yeah.
But my own belief is most of the startups are going to go away. Some will survive and thrive. Conversely, I think most of the traditionals will probably survive, but there's going to be some losers as well. Who? Yep. I don't know. But if you look at other industries and other changes in technology, that's usually how it goes. Some of the startups, figure out the ecosystem faster than others, and they thrive in it. And some of the traditionals just can't make the transition. They can't let go of what was always successful for them.
So, Lindsay, you're talking about the need to make money, which is what companies are all about, right? And then John, you were talking about software, and to go to Diess again, he said that software makes EVs more profitable for the company than vehicles powered by ICEs. And I don't know if this goes to the point, one of your favorite topics, John, of data monetization, or if it's just simply the ability that, the OEM through over-the-air updates has the ability to, make, as it were, virtual service calls to vehicles that they would then get the money directly for.
Yeah, I think you can make as much money with software services with internal combustion engines as with electric cars. I don't see the difference. I mean, yeah, you can do an over-the-air update with an electric car, but guess what? The new Silverado, the new F-150 can have over-the-air updates. You can reflash the params for the engine and make it perform differently, better, presumably. So I'm not sure what he's talking about, why EVs are better in that regard. Maybe somebody who knows this better can explain it to me. But there's no question, data monetization is the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. And Deese specifically said he thinks it's going to be a $5 trillion business by 2025. And he wants Volkswagen to capture over $1 trillion of that. And those are numbers that just make my head spin.
John, did VW's stock go up when he made those very hyperbolic claims?
Probably not. The investment community, it doesn't care what traditional automakers say, because the traditional automakers have trained them to not believe them.
Yeah.
And so now it's up to the General Motors, the Toyotas, the Volkswagens of the world to deliver on these promises. And if they do, then the investment community will believe them.
Yeah, I mean, in the media, we just see it all the time, the kind of like the gaming, presentations and press releases and announcements that are really kind of stacked. I mean, that Stellantis EV day was really stacked towards the investment community, not the media.
But, they missed it on timing. If Stellantis had done that announcement back in February, stock would have gone through the roof.
Yeah, it's interesting.
But now everybody's made, they've had battery days and they've had these days and those days. And now Stellantis comes out and it's, you guys too.
Oh, come on, John. You got to be fair to Tavares. I mean, Stellantis only started existing in January. So it would have been a little premature if they did this in February.
No, you're absolutely right, Gary. All I'm saying, though, is had they been able to make that announcement in February or March, when, the stock market was just churning like mad with anything EV, they would have been able to, ride the crest of the wave. Mm-hmm. But, and for the very reasons that you cite, they're making their announcement now. As far as the investment community goes, that's old hat. That's old news.
So John, when you said reflashing the EEPROM, it got me to thinking about the executive order that President Biden signed to promote competition, including the right to repair for vehicles, which would include things like changing that. So there was the very famous Tesla case of recently where a driver punctured the front belly pan and broke the coolant line port to the battery. And the Tesla dealer said, this is going to cost you $16,000 to fix. He took it to a repair shop and got it done for $700. Okay, so I want to put to you guys: is this a realistic example, or is this just such an outlier that it's just crazy?
Go ahead, Lindsay.
Well, I'm thinking of Tesla's. Tesla really doesn't have the same sort of broad, robust dealer network that everybody else does. And, they've had some cases recently when rodents have been getting into these vehicles because they're using soy wrapped insulation and so forth. So mice and squirrels smell this stuff and they get in. And when that happens to you, you take it to a Tesla repair center, which isn't a traditional car dealer. It's some of these places are in kind of weird industrial places and cities. And, they're not set up the way Chevy and Ford and Toyota and Honda are. So, good for that guy. My first thought is he figured it out and was able to get it. Hopefully he got it fixed safely. I think that's an outlier.
It is and it isn't. Look, he took it to a Tesla store. They look up in the manual and it's like, we don't know how to fix it. We got to replace the battery pack. And that's $16,000. Then he takes it to a garage that knows what it's doing, specializes in electric cars, and they figure out how to drill part out of it out, how to tap a new coupler in, get it all fixed. $700 is still a lot of money, but it's a whole lot less than 16,000. But what all the independent garages are grappling with right now, and this is where it gets dicey with right to repair, is got to do with cyber protection. So right now, if you want to do a diagnostics, for example, as an independent garage, you have got to be able to link into a computer at the OEM so that they can handle the software end of things, all from a cyber protection standpoint. And if you, as an independent garage, don't have that right equipment or the ability to get into it, you're screwed. And guess what? Every automaker is different. So in many cases, you need several pieces of equipment, to do what one scanner would have done for you in the past. And I just know enough about this to get me in trouble. I know there's probably people listening to the show right now who go, oh my God, you're not even, getting into the real depth of the problem. But it's a real issue. And what the automakers would like is force us to go to the dealerships, because dealers are going to lose a lot of business with over-the-air updates. If something can be fixed with software, you're no longer going to take it to the dealer. So if they can limit what independent garages, if the automakers can limit what independent garages can do, you're going to be forced to go to the dealer for this. And that's what the whole right to repair uproar is about.
Right. And it's not just auto companies. I mean, it's agricultural equipment manufacturers, cell phone manufacturers. I mean, just product after product after product. The companies that produce these products are saying, no, we're the ones who can fix them. Only we can fix them. As soon as you do something, as soon as you make a change, this is, it's going to void the warranty. It's going to violate all sorts of things. But to your point, John, a couple of years ago, sitting in for you, I was hosting a panel on cybersecurity and trucking that was put on by the National Defense Industrial Association. And one of the things that I learned there was that when you plug the diagnostic equipment into a vehicle, this then gives the diagnostic tool access to the whole system. So let's say, for the sake of argument, that you bought this piece of diagnostic equipment from a company that was based somewhere overseas where the people might not be crazy about the United States. Suddenly, your vehicle can be hacked just by plugging in that tool. And so, there's a consideration that has to be given to, as you say, the cyber protection of vehicles on the road, whether they're, trucks or cars or tanks or what have you.
Well, I think what we're talking about here is it's a transformation of the back shop as well. And for those repair shops and dealers that don't want to really get into this, I mean, somebody else has got to take their place because the vehicles are going to need some maintenance. Now, I think that there's going to be a reduction of revenue because of electric vehicles. If the battery guys are right, and these things don't need maintenance, and they're 200,000+ mile propositions, and the e-motors and the power electronics and the battery, that whole propulsion system is going to be maintenance free. I mean, I just took my car to a shop, and when you look at all the elements that they can make money on right now, it seems to me that there's a lot less with an electric propulsion system. But there will be these kind of very high technology areas where you've really got to know your stuff. You've got to be an electrical engineer pretty much to know the fault codes and when you plug that diagnostic tool in, know how to read it. And so I think we're going to see a big transformation in that regard.
Yeah, we need to do a whole show on right to repair and get an expert in here and really get to the bottom of it.
Yeah.
All right. Final subject. Okay. So the Chicago Auto Show is starting this week for people in the greater Chicagoland area to go look at vehicles. Okay. So I want to ask you guys, Jeep has been doing its Camp Jeep at Chicago since 2004. This year, we started off the show talking about the Bronco. There will be the Built Wild Bronco Mountain Experience that people will be able to go and drive Broncos on a 38-degree hill. Okay. And They're going to have, real life experiences. So it's just not going to be looking at a Bronco that is sitting on a piece of carpet. It's going to be out in the real world. Jeep will be running its vehicles back and forth, and so on and so forth. So here's my question to you. Is looking at static displays, as we've long been familiar with at auto shows, going away, and will they transition to something where there are more experiential things? And thirdly, will these experiential things need to be attached to auto shows, or can they just go to parking lots of shopping malls and just do it that way?
Well, I mean, what you're talking about, you remember Land Rover created these things that were supposed to be at dealerships. It was kind of a Land Rover Center, and the dealer was going to invest in a hill and mud crossings and water and kind of tricky terrain to be able to give that experience to a Land Rover customer. And I know there's a Jeep dealer out 96 going towards Lansing, and you can see it off the interstate that has his own off-road course. I think it's really smart for 4x4 sellers out there, because there are so many elements, as we've seen driving the Bronco. I don't know. I mean, we've seen in some recent auto shows, here's a sampling of a autonomous car and what that's like, a self-driving car. I think people like to go to auto shows and just see nice, shiny, good smelling, brand new cars and look at them and sit in them and that kind of thing. And we know we've seen a shrinkage of this from the media perspective, but some of these auto shows, the last Detroit auto show, still brought in a lot of people. It'll be interesting to see in Chicago, and then we've got LA that's going to do a show, and I think New York is still going to do something. And so to see how many regular consumers come in and still want that experience, I think it's great. If you've got you're selling 4x4s, I think you've got to have that kind of thing. And the more thrilling, the better, really. I think that'll sell some Broncos. Of course, Bronco is sold out until 2023. So, yeah.
Well, look, whatever kind of venue that you're looking at right now, it can be auto shows, it can be museums. They're all looking for experiential things that they can offer to people to be there. And consumers themselves, I think, are no longer interested in just walking around a big hall looking at shiny metal. Sure, you've got enthusiasts who will do that, but to get everyday families in, automakers no longer believe that that's enough. They think that you've got to really have people experience the new technology that you're selling them, or the new type of vehicle that you're selling them. And with more and more off-road sales taking place, there's a real keen interest in consumers to learn about that and experience that. And once they experience it, then they're even more excited about it. So getting back to your question there, Gary, I think auto shows, as far as media days go, are dead. I'm not even sure automakers are going to use auto shows to reveal new products. They can do those reveals online. We're all going to be there. They've been astonished at how much attention they get revealing these things online, but they need some sort of show to get mass amounts of people in. And if you have a bunch of automakers doing things at once, there's a critical mass that brings in a lot of people. So I guess, bottom line is, media shows or auto shows for the media, it's a dying breed. It hasn't died yet, but it's dying. Whereas for consumers, I think the future could be pretty bright as long as you make it really fun and attractive to be there.
Yeah, John, I think maybe a key here, you make some good points, but a key is going to be simulators, because these vehicles are getting so sophisticated. I mean, you go into a dealership, they can't tell you how ABS works, and that's 30 years old. They can't tell you how an all-wheel drive system works. And they're getting more sophisticated. Now you've got automatic emergency braking and lane keeping, and you can't really do that in even the basement of a trade show venue. So you really need to get people into very realistic simulators for these things, because the dealers don't want to take the time to show you how these systems work. It's overlay upon overlay of electrically controlled, very sophisticated safety and performance systems. So the only way to really show this stuff, if you're going to, and they should, is through simulation.
I love that idea. I think that's a fantastic idea.
All right. Okay. But this is where you guys are completely off base here. Okay. when this family goes to this show and they're getting the corn dogs and they're getting the candied almonds and they're just enjoying them, they're not going to go sit down for a tutorial on how a anti-lock braking system works or any of this stuff. Okay. They want to be entertained. And that's what these shows are about. These shows are about entertainment. And if there's a little bit of education that can sneak in the back door, that's fine. But to say like, all right, at 2 p.m., we will have a seminar on the actuation of all of your safety systems. Come back. Nobody's going. Okay.
Yeah, but Gary, I got to tell you, a wise man named McElroy once said, and I think this is a great idea, why not sell cars at auto shows? Why not do that transaction right on the show floor? And so here's this brand new red Silverado, okay? And that would be having a simulator there or having some sort of tutorial, or at least, what the dealer's supposed to do at the dealership, but they don't do, maybe that's what auto shows should become, is a transactional venue as well. And the way to do that is because you're going through the list and you're saying, oh, this baby's got automatic emergency braking and lane keeping, and it's got a LiDAR and a radar, and it's got, hill descent control, et cetera, et cetera. What the hell are these things? So you're going to, you sign for the vehicle and then you're in your vehicle and you have no idea about any of this stuff. So I think maybe there's a hybrid there in terms of, transform the auto show into this giant kind of bazaar of selling cars.
And Gary, you're right. If it's going to be we're going to have a seminar on safety, and you can come and experience it virtually, no one's going to play. But if you make it a game, and part of the game is, how can you navigate this course, and look how many times the safety thing saved your butt, or how you cleverly avoided a situation. You make it a game. You make it entertaining. You give them a prize. Whatever.
While you're getting shot on the freeway, John. While somebody's shooting at you.
I like that. Look, I've always wanted, the radio buttons on a car to launch missiles and a machine gun at the top of the shifter. So I'm right there with you, Gary.
You could call it 405 freeway at rush hour. Okay.
I am so there.
All right, before you guys go deeper into this scary hole, we should end the show.
It is a good place to wrap it up. Lindsay, thanks so much for coming back on. Always good to have you on.
Always a pleasure, John. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. No, and it was great having Charlie Freese with us too.
Absolutely.
Very interesting what they're doing there. And Gary, you and I will just keep on doing it.
Let's do it next week.
We'll do it then. So thanks everybody for having tuned in.
Autoline After Hours is brought to you by Bridgestone Tires, solutions for your journey, and by Borg Warner, propulsion solutions that support a clean, energy-efficient world.
Visit our website, Autoline.tv, where you can watch us live Thursday afternoons. Get your daily fix with Autoline Daily and in-depth analysis and interviews with Autoline This Week. There's all that and much more at Autoline.tv.